as well. So my name is Calvin Thigpen. I'm an associate professor of medicine at the University of Mississippi and the associate internal medicine residency program director. I am co-leading this workshop with Steve Geraci, who is a professor of medicine at East Tennessee State University, Quillen College of Medicine. And you'll be hearing from him in just a little while. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker. He's actually a colleague of mine at the University of Mississippi, Galen Marshall. He's a professor of medicine there. He's also the vice chair of research for our Department of Medicine. And he's going to come talk to us initially about the anatomy and physiology of a good scientific paper.
Thank you, Calvin. The other thing that he didn't say, so that you see that I have a little bit of creds, is that I am now in my fourth term. For the last 12 years, I've got 4 more to go, as editor-in-chief of the Annals of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunologists. That's my subspecialty, is allergy immunology. So I've done this for a long time. And what I will tell you, this is one of those things. My mother was a school teacher, and she always told me from the earliest part when she found out I was going to be a school teacher, which is really what I am, is that there's 3 things you have to tell your audience. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them. So I'm about to tell you what I'm going to tell you. And what I'm going to tell you is that if there's one message you get, and it's already Thursday afternoon after lunch and blood sugars are starting down, the most important thing is that as you're evaluated as a clinician educator at your institution, unless you have a very, very forward-thinking institution, and there are not many of them out there like that, part of what they're going to lump you up against the people that do research, that are investigators. And one of the ways that you do that, and this word is evolving, it's evolving in this organization, it's evolving all over, and that is what they want you to be is a scholar. Whether you're an educational scholar or a discovery scholar. How does an educator demonstrate his or her scholarship? One of the ways is to be viewed as an active, competent reviewer for medical journals. It is not as easy as it seems, but it's not as hard as people think it could be, and it could be a great pathway for you, for your promotion pathway, to be recognized as a competent reviewer. And I'll have comments at the end of this, because it is from that pool that I pick editorial board members. I know lots and lots of medical editors around the country. There's not a single one of us that's going to pick somebody because they're nice looking, or they get a good recommendation from someone, or they give us $50. Well, maybe not the $50 part, but the other part. We are academicians, so $50 means a lot to us, right? So the point is that I want to show you how we think about this, and I think it's fairly representative. This is not allergy specific in any way. This has to do with how to review for medical journals, regardless of what the thing is. The first thing to do is the idea of both how to and how not to analyze the information you have. What would you say is the most dangerous problem in medical literature? If you had one word answer, what would you think it might be? The greatest threat, it's bias. The idea that everybody comes from a perspective. By the way, what do you say to someone who says that you can't have bias and be an effective reviewer? What is your response to them? There's 2 words for that one. The 2 words is bye-bye, because there's no such thing as not having a point of view. If you do, I don't want you to review for my journal, because if you don't have a point of view, that means you're not read, you're not willing to make an opinion, and so on. But it requires 2 things. It requires transparency so that I know where you're coming from, and it requires objectivity. Now think about that. As educators, as researchers, as clinicians, is that not what we want to be in everything that we do? We want to be transparent so people know who we are, and we want to be objective. Take the data and make of them, let the data lead our conclusions rather than opposite. What is the opportunity, therefore, to eliminate all bias from the medical literature? Well, the answer is simple: small and none. And I can take away the word small. There is none but there. So then what is the best remedy for this? And the answer is transparency. That's why you're asked to do disclosures when you review for a journal. And if all anybody's doing is asking you to review for a journal, you say, oh, what a pain in the butt. Why should I do that? You should want to do that. Number one is that it gives the editors an opportunity to see when you would and wouldn't be appropriate. So you are a speaker for AstraZeneca for their latest and greatest antihypertensive medicine. And a paper comes through that touts the efficacy of that medicine in a population. Are you the person that I want to review for that? Well, maybe so, maybe not. But I do want to know that you have a relationship with them already, and that relationship could influence your opinion and the review that you would provide back. I tend to do that on the back side, not on the front side. So you would have to tell me, I don't think I can review this objectively, I want to recuse myself. But then when I got your review, I would look at it in the context of your relationships and see if it clouds it. It could be equally so that you are a speaker or on an ad board for, GlaxoSmithKline that has the #1 competitor. So and then you provide a rather negative review of the manuscript. Is it something wrong with the manuscript, or is it your perspective there? Those are some of the challenges that they go through. So being transparent has benefit to the journal, but it has benefit to you as well as a reviewer. So what are you looking for in terms of the data? What is the objective of the communication? So you look at it and you read it through. First of all, don't review a manuscript by taking your electronic pen as you go down, start on the first page and go to work. Read it. Read through it one time and then try to get the overall gestalt. Now what I will tell you, again, having done this now this is my 13th year, and I have people that are colleagues of mine, if you read through that and you don't get it, you don't really know what they're trying to say, look at it again briefly. If you still don't know what they're trying to say, don't waste your time. Send the note back to the editor that says, I can't make head nor tails of this. It doesn't make any sense. It would be nice if you iterated for us the reason why you can't make sense of it, not just a 2-line statement. 2-line reviews are never any good. They're never any good. It doesn't help. It ends up being a negative for you, it's a negative for the journal, and it's a negative for the author. They don't learn why it's a worthless paper, okay? There's no such thing as worthless, but you get the drift of what I'm saying. It's not something that should be published in its current form. So, are they trying to report a new finding? Or are they trying to answer a clinical or research question? Even a clinical case report can be in that. Why in the world is somebody putting up a case report? Well, I need a publication. Or I'm a trainee and I'm a junior faculty member that is mentoring this trainee, and they're expecting us to get a publication, so we'll publish a case report. Even though there's nothing really new, they're not really trying to answer a question, they're just trying to be clever in the way that they write it. And the third is that are they trying to make a claim, either a subtle claim or an open claim? You want to find out which one of those three, or in some cases more than one of those, they may be trying to do. The responsibilities for the editors, so you know, my responsibility is #1 to guarantee that that author or group of authors gets an objective review of their work. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm going to accept it. It doesn't mean I'm going to reject it. It means that they need to get an objective review. Even in a subspecialty journal like mine, I don't have the expertise to be able to make that decision by myself. And secondly, the whole principle of peer review is not based on the idea the editor decides whether or not your journal article is worth publishing or not. She or he makes that decision in the context of being, if you will, the chairman of the board, and the board are the reviewers, the associate editors, etc., that come to a consensus that this manuscript should be published, this one should not. We have to ensure disclosure, readability, particularly in the world of international, and the ability of Microsoft Word to do transliterations, not translations. They call it a translation. In many cases, it's transliteration. If you don't think that, go to Facebook. Most of you probably do Facebook. And in Facebook, and people that have other languages, you can hit the translate button. That Facebook doesn't do AI type stuff. It transliterates the word, and oftentimes the grammar makes no sense whatsoever. If you can't understand it because it's not understandable in its current form, the really good journals, we try to do this. So does that mean I'm claiming we're a really good journal? I guess I am. But seriously, is that we try to screen that. We have managing editors and editorial assistants who look through these, but the volume of our submissions is such that it's difficult to do every single one. But if you get into it and you just don't understand it, not because you don't understand the science or you don't understand the clinical principles, because it's not making any sense. Again, if you don't, then if it gets published, the reader's not going to understand it either. You're not only the representative for us as the journal, you're also the representative for the reader. You're being asked for your expertise in both of those things. Is it scholarly enough to be published, and is it readable enough to be understood by the reader? You are that person who's being asked to do that. And the third, and that's that issue of the applicability to the audience itself. Your responsibility is the critical assessment of the article, putting it into perspective. Did you learn something from reading this article? Now, here's the rub. I don't really know who you are. So you, as a new reviewer, more or less, and when you're new, you don't have nearly as many publications a couple years out of your residency or fellowship as you do 20 years out of your residency or fellowship. So as you're new and we want to bring you on board, some journals, and we're one of them, have programs for associate reviewers where you're automatically paired with a more senior reviewer. You get to see their review, they get to see your review. The editor already knows that. They'll oftentimes bring a third person in, so they have 2 seasoned and 1 learner. And the goal of that is to train you to be a good reviewer for that journal. That's much more likely to happen if they see that you're already trying to publish. And if you're not even trying to publish, you can say, you know what, I'd like to review for Journal X. Send a letter to the editor, send an email to the editor, and tell them why you want to review. Not, I need this so I can get promoted someday. But you want to tell them that you get it, the need for a reviewer. I don't know a single journal south of New England Journal of Medicine that is not looking for new reviewers. Us old people are getting older day by day. They need to be replaced by new people. And the whole idea is that peer review, somebody at your stage of development as an author will not necessarily write in a way that I understand and appreciate like you can understand and appreciate. So that age difference makes a difference in that as well. And then the third question is that we ask the question of practical application. Does it have value to the readership of our journal? And you need to understand what the readership of the journal is. So that if you want to be a reviewer and you're getting started in this, my advice is to volunteer to review for the journals you already read. For the ones that you like, the ones that you pay attention to, because you're going to be already oriented to that journal better than you will be to some ethereal journal. The New England Journal of Medicine, you will likely get a nice little form letter that says thank you very much for your volunteerism. We'll put your letter on file. The file's a little round. It's a little further down from the level, but they'll put it on file. But if you want to review for a journal that has maybe a lower impact factor to start out with, or that's a newer journal, I guarantee you we're looking for quality reviewers every single day. Again, going through some of the red flags that you see. Somebody who claims a new finding. Is it really new, or is it just new to them? And if they're good writers, the first thing they'll say is, to our knowledge, this represents the first. Well, if you already know of 5 papers that talk about it, you know that to our knowledge is a problem for the authors. That's a red flag. That information needs to be communicated back to the editors. That's the kind of thing we want to know. Why do you not like this paper? Or why do you like this paper? Never write, this is a crappy paper, it shouldn't be published. Now, you can write the message that it's a crappy paper and shouldn't be published, but you need to give reasons why so we can communicate that back to the author. There are precious few papers that when they're submitted the first time, this is the best paper on this topic I've ever read, it should be accepted as is. Because most of us we can always make a good product better. So if you really think it's one, this is trivial in the things that need to be done differently. This is an excellent paper. Again, the more you can come through and define that, the more comfortable the editors are going to be in taking your recommendation for the paper. Otherwise, it's just a waste of time. You wasted our time for 2 weeks. It went out to you. You wrote something. We look at it and say, we're not going to pay attention to that. We either make it up for ourselves or we have to send it out to someone else, which is a strike against the journal for the simple reason that it takes longer to get that first decision back. And what authors want is a rapid turnaround from submission to first decision. You want that as an author. We want to do that as a journal. It's a win-win, but it can very quickly become a lose-lose. So one big flag is this new finding. The second is a complex message. You have to read it 3 times to get it. You get it on the 3rd time, but you have to read it 3 times. In the monthly journals you get, how many times do you read an article 3 times? How many times do you read an article 1 time? It's not 100%. You select, because we're all busy. And we're all there's none of us that look at just one journal every month. We're looking at a variety of journals. There's an information explosion, so we pick and choose the time that we use to invest it. The more straightforward the message is, the more likely it is to be useful to the reader. Keep it simple, stupid is a wonderful principle, and if it's so complex that you have to read it 3 times, it's not likely a journal article that you should recommend highly in its current form. Message may be very important, but you may say, you got to make this a simpler message. It's too complex. It's too difficult to understand. And that's important feedback to the editors that they'll feed back to the authors. The bias, what kind and how much. And that's information that can go both in confidential to the editors. Most journals have that feature, and it can go to the readers itself. By the way, we're going to make this slide deck available to anybody that wants it, so don't feel bad about having to copy this stuff down. You're welcome to have it. There's none of this that is unique to me. The data presentations, look at the population they're using. If you're going to do a study about underweight Norwegians and the impact of a given intervention, I'm probably not going to use it much in Mississippi, because I don't have a lot of underweight Norwegian ancestry patients in Mississippi. If you're going to spread the spectrum to include 70% of your population has a body mass index at or above 30, now it gets closer to what I deal with. And if you take half of that is minority, now it gets a lot closer. So as we are reading particularly clinical research articles, what does it have to do? If there's a journal article that you're reviewing for what amounts to an American journal, but it's an article from Turkey, is it data that's only applicable to people of Turkish ancestry who live in Ankara? Or is it data that would have a more global applicability, but the population they studied happened to be in Ankara? That's part of the information that you have to decide, and it becomes very important in recommendations that you make back to the editor. And then finally, the statistical interpretations. Is it in fact another form of bias? In pharma-sponsored articles, this can oftentimes be a big problem. They throw up all these wonderful statistical magic. And the question is, don't ever be afraid. Again, most of the more robust journals will have a biostatistics editor, or they'll have a function where you can say, I think this needs a biostatistics review because it sounds too good to be true. Anything that's too good to be true usually is, and it applies to journal articles just like it does to everything else in life. There's the concept that goes with this of lies, damn lies, and statistics, and what it is that the analysis does and doesn't do. Remember, we all know this, but just to remind you, it's just a tool to describe differences and determine probability of those differences being due to chance. But I submit to you that most of us in this room, if not every one of us, came under a certain influence from the time we were in medical school or graduate school, even to the current day, that if it's P equals 0.05 or less, that makes it correct. And God forbid that it's P equal 0.051. That's not significant, even though the differences are like this. And it's a big sample size, and it didn't quite meet statistical significance. Yes, we need to be reasonable in our understanding and knowledge of statistics. That's good for us as clinicians, that's good for us as educators or researchers, and it's certainly good for us as journal reviewers. But none of us, well, there may be somebody in the audience, but most of us are not statistical or epidemiological experts. So with the argument of that, what are the things that we should know versus not know? One is to recognize this mathematical standard with the tools. The second is to understand the challenges of setting the value. And I give an example that I like to give all the time, and that is that if I had a therapy that I did a sufficient sample size to show that a 5% difference had a p-value of 0.0001, 1 in 10,000 chance of being due to chance alone. And then I had another therapy that had a 70% difference, but the p-value was 0.3. And oh, by the way, in the second example, it's a life-threatening disease for which there's really no good therapy, and it's pretty sure that if I do nothing, I'm likely to die. How open-minded am I going to be to that second one, and when it says there may be a 1 in 3 chance that it's due to chance alone, because without it, it's 0. And I'm not advocating that we take data that have a p-value of 0.3. you're getting the point of what I'm trying to say, is that you have to put the statistics into context, particularly in a clinical journal. And then the other cool part is, which test do you want to use? It's okay, so we're all for the p-value, but for chi-square, ANOVA, and COVA, and all those, they all will report a p-value. Now they come in with F's and T's and stuff like that, but in the final analysis for statistics, they report a p-value. So if we don't have an idea of what's going on, if it seems like that it's so complex and everything hinges on it and that overall data looks kind of funny to you, I strongly urge that you put in your review, because the editors see this. It doesn't mean they'll always take your word for it. There may be another reviewer that understands the statistics well enough that they don't have to send it to a biostatistics reviewer. But it calls the attention to the editor to what you are observing, and it tells me as an editor, this is someone who has been thoughtful and been considerate, and you're the kind of person I'm going to come back to the next time I need a manuscript reviewed. And that's what you're doing as you're establishing your reputation as a young person. We all know that a p-value does not confer scientific validity, just mathematical probability, and that was my argument there. And then the question is the minimum that you should know. And I think the minimum that you should know is what we just told you. And then basically get a flavor for how to get there over time, the basic analytic techniques. When is a p-value from a student's t-test versus chi-square analysis versus an ANOVA analysis? When are those basically there? Our journal thought that was so important that in 2009 we had a special issue on statistics for the clinician. And it's, the nice thing about statistics, they don't change so fast that this is now outdated and it's 8 years old. It was so good that the Annals of Allergy is the official journal for the American College of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology. They, in their welcome to fellows every year, when new fellows come in more, they send them an electronic copy of this. And it's been used a lot. And it's been used, and it's useful. And by the way, if you're interested in it, I'll be happy. And I meant to put it up, Steve, and I forgot. But I'll get it there so that everybody will have a chance to see it. You're welcome to have it. It's on our website, and you're welcome to have it. Because it's written for the level of the fellow and the resident, and then by extension, the junior faculty member. It's a very worthwhile thing. And it was written by folks at LSU Shreveport. They did a really nice job. So the minimum that you should know is enough to feel comfortable with the basic analytic techniques to see if someone's trying to shine you with statistics, the descriptive statistics and the validity testing. So what about relevance? Is the science important to the field, whether it's education science, whether it's a clinical observation, or whether it is a research paper? And what about the practical part of it? Does it have applicability to practice? Now, if it's a basic science journal, first of all, most of you are not likely to review in a basic science journal, and the relevance may not be as important. But if it's an education journal, how to teach medicine better, or it's a clinical journal, this is relevant to patient care, then it needs to be practical as well as scientifically sound. Is it important to you? Again, that's very interesting. Does it hold your attention? Do you think it's important? Don't make it up. If you don't think it's important, say that. It doesn't mean that we're going to think, because I don't agree with you, and when you get your thing back, the email back that says, and you said, I don't like this journal article, and I didn't because of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I recommend reject. And it comes back, it rarely will come back and say accept, but it'll come back and say revision required, or accept with minor revision or whatever, and you say, well, they didn't take my word for it. No, that's not true. The editors take it, read it carefully, and weigh what is the best thing to do for the overall essence of the journal. Most journals will let you see what the other reviewers write. It's disguised, so if there's 3 reviewers for a manuscript, they'll get to see yours as well as you get to see the other 2. But they don't know exactly who you are. It's not. There are a couple of noted exceptions to that. British Medical Journal won't do that. They do it open, and so I don't review for those guys for that reason. But most of them are anonymous, and it becomes worthwhile. And then you ask the question if it's new findings or old hat. Let me just talk for a moment about this critical submitted manuscript. Critical reviewing them. Start with the title. Does the message, is it communicated from the title? Is it appropriate for the findings that they have? How many authors are there on the paper? If there's 27 authors, that should be a red flag. For us, we have a limit of 5 without the authors having to defend that all of them fulfill the 3 major criteria from the International Committee for Medical Journal Editors, that they actually contributed to the paper. And that speaks to the journal if they let 27 authors on it, and it's clear that some drug company, editorial company, wrote the thing because it's a disguised ad for the product. What is the expertise of the authors? What is the reputation, if you happen to know it? And have they potentially given their disclosure? The abstract will give you an idea of what the paper is trying to communicate. Does the abstract connect with the rest of the paper? Are there big pieces of the paper that are left out of the abstract altogether, or equally bad? Do they mention stuff in the abstract that's never in the paper? That's an important thing. And by the way, you can see all these are important when you write these papers as well as when you review them. What about introduction? How do you lay the groundwork? What is the problem? What is the current state of knowledge? What aspect of that knowledge is a paper addressed? If it's a review, it's going to be more comprehensive. If it's an original article, it's going to be more focused. What about the methodology? How and where did they get their data? The sample itself, we talked about that. The data collection methods. There are biases that are built in and inaccuracies that are built in based upon the type of data that they have. The data source, were they subjective data, how they felt in a questionnaire? Were they objective data that were obtained in a standardized fashion? And then the analysis. Is this a small 10 people in each group and they make these global assumptions? Or is this 1,000 people in each group that they're doing a comprehensive multi-center assessment? The results, what did they find? How clear is it? Can you understand what they did? Can you tell whether the prose and the tables line up? As people talk about freestanding figures and tables, you ought to be able to get the message from them and their legends, but then it ought to be reinforced in the prose of the results section. The data expression, things like real numbers versus percentage. Look at the scales. People do that. They'll change the scales and they'll pull it in a way where it really looks like that there are big differences, and in fact, if they did the scales correctly, the differences would all be crushed down. And then measure the endpoints. Are these direct measures or surrogates? And do the authors identify them as such? Not saying there's anything wrong with a surrogate marker, but do they call it that? Or are they trying to represent it as a direct one? And again, P less than 0.05 may be necessary, but it's rarely sufficient. Finally, the discussion to put this finding into perspective. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them. It's still a big thing. What was the reason they did the paper? What were the unexpected or inconsistent findings they found? Describe or explain the confounding factor. Put in the proper literature context where it fits, confirms or contradicts, and the claims in their proper perspective. It also gives future stuff that needs to be done. Even review articles can do that. There's no such thing as a totally comprehensive review article. They can say, this is more information that needs to be generated from what we've done. And then finally, to make sure that we're providing candid, thorough comments. If the results of a clinical trial, is it registered? The editors really should do this for you. This should be done, but occasionally it'll sneak through. Just take a chance to look. It should be stated in the context of the manuscript that it was clinicaltrials.org or a foreign equivalent. The Canadians have their equivalent, the Europeans have their equivalent. Is it sponsored by pharma? That doesn't make it a bad paper, but it puts it in a different perspective automatically. Is it blinded or placebo-controlled or open-labeled? Do the authors have a relationship with the sponsor? Again, it doesn't mean it's bad. It means it needs to be disclosed and taken with a grain of salt. Pick a journal to review for that targets your particular level of sophistication. Don't try to review for a hardcore science journal if you don't have the background. Don't try to review for a journal just to be reviewing that you have no particular interest in. The level should increase with time and experience. And then the final comment is to be skeptical, but not cynical. Skeptical is prove it to me. Cynical is I don't care. The difference is very important as you review these, because above all, this candid, thorough comments are most important. This is the last slide with the practical aspect, prompt, succinct, and thorough. Most journals have an instruction for reviewers, and I'll show you a picture of ours in 1 second. Each type of review has its own nuances, so you don't do a review article like you do an original article, like you do a letter. Each one of these journals will tell you what they're looking for in these different nuances. So when you're asked to review a letter for a journal, go and look and see what the editors have told the authors they want for a letter in their journal, and then identify the expertise of the journal. And then, because the last thing is that most of your institutions will give you credit for being an ad hoc reviewer when you put it on your CV, but you'll get a whole lot more credit when you're asked to be a member of the editorial board. And we take editorial board members from consistent, reliable, and thoughtful reviewers. And for me, and again, I think I represent more and more of the individuals, even as an old fart, is we want young people, we want millennials on our boards more and more, because you give a fresh view to things that are important in the diversity in the admixture where we go. And this is my last slide. This is nothing more than the face page of the Annals of Allergy, and what I put over here is a particular area that Elsevier puts up for reviewers and the information that it provides for there. So with that, critical reading, interpreting, and applying, prove the process. Participating in the journal review process is giving back. And the last point, which is the most important one for me, is you take it as both an honor as well as a responsibility when you're asked to review. If you have the time and you're willing to make the time, you will find it worthwhile and a very rewarding thing.